So in an Angular application, I have grown to believe very strongly that most of the modal windows within a single page application should be directly accessible by route. Now, in the early AngularJS days, this was actually quite complicated because there was only a single route. But as of Angular 2 and greater, we now have the concept of auxiliary routes, which means that we can have multiple routes side by side. So for example, in this demo where I want to collect a list of friends, I can trigger the new friends modal window from anywhere within the application. So for example, if I'm on the home page here, I can trigger the new friends modal, and you can see that it is here in this auxiliary route, modal/add friend. And of course, if I go to the friends view, I can also trigger it here as well. And you can see that we now have, again, the modal add friend route, but this time it's alongside a secondary, or that's bad terminology, it's alongside a deeper primary route. So we have friends in the primary router outlet and modal add friends in the secondary modal outlet, which is our auxiliary route. Now, by creating our application architecture in this way, we actually provide a much more flexible architecture and, I think, a better long-term user experience because it allows us to directly link the user to a modal window. So for example, if I refresh now, you'll see that I refresh directly into the modal window, and I'm doing that from the home view. If I'm in the friends view, I could again refresh, and you'll see that I am in the modal window again, this time in the friends view context. So by creating a route accessible modal window, we allow for much more clear, deep linking within the application, and of course we create things like a more intuitive back button experience, right? I can hit my back button to get out of the modal window, I can use my forward button to get back in, my back button to get out, and so on and so forth. Now, to see that this works, we can trigger actually let's go home, we can trigger friends, and let's say Tina, and let's add another friend, actually let's do multiples, so let's say Tom, and Bruce, and Brianna. And now, if I go into friends, you'll see that we have all of those friends, Bruce, Brianna, Tom, Tina. We can delete some, so on and so forth. We can do it from here, right? So let's add Sammy, and you can see there is Sammy. So let's see how this works behind the scenes. The first thing, let's look at our app module to see how our router is actually being configured. So the trick to making a route accessible modal window is that we're going to start using a secondary outlet. In this case, I'm calling it modal, and it's going to have all of the modal windows as a child of this secondary outlet. This allows the primary outlets and the secondary outlets to operate independently but in parallel. Okay, so now to see how those outlets work, let's take a look at our root app component. And you can see here that we have our two router outlets. Here's the primary router outlet, and here is our secondary named router outlet for modal, which means that, again, popping back into our route configuration, this path to friends will render inside the primary router outlet, and this path to add friends will render inside our named secondary outlet called modal, right? Which again is what we're seeing right here. Now, by creating a routable modal outlet, it allows us to, or I should say, it forces us to create an application architecture that is more independent. Because we're decoupling the modal window from its calling context, we have to create a means for these two disparate views to communicate. And in this case, they're going to communicate via a shared state management system. I call it the runtime abstraction, but you could use something like Redux or NGRX or Akita, or you could even use a simple pub/sub mechanism. So let's take a look. Here's my friends view, and you'll see that I'm injecting here the friends runtime. And when I initialize my application, I just go into that friends runtime, I get the friends stream, I subscribe to it, and I just save the friends collection as they come through that stream. So I'm choosing not to use something like the async pipe here. I enjoy having the explicit subscription in the component. I don't mind this boilerplate. I find it easier to reason about. And then we simply loop over the friends in our view. So you can see that the view here for the friends list is actually quite simple. We don't have to deal with adding friends at all. That's all handled by the completely decoupled modal window. Now, if we jump over to our add friends modal window, you can see that the modal window also uses the friends runtime. Again, because these are disparate views, they need a way to communicate through an intermediary, and for me that intermediary is the runtime abstraction for friends. And here you can see, again, we're taking that friends runtime and we're using that friends runtime to process data. In this case, when I submit the friends form, right, when I'm submitting this form here, the submit action goes to the friends runtime and adds the friend. And here you can see I either perform a bulk input or I'm closing the modal window. That's what this checkbox differentiates. And then that's all there is to it. So by creating a decoupled view, we actually simplify the logic of the view, driving all of the logic into the shared abstraction, in this case my runtime state management system, which means that I can now start adding friends from anywhere within the application in which it makes sense from a user experience standpoint. And my friends view, which is also using the same runtime abstraction, will immediately get those friends if the view is rendered, or we'll pull those friends in during initialization if the view is rendered in the future. Right, which means again that we can go from the home, we can add, actually let's just refresh to get a new list. I can add, let's say, Bruce, and I can add Bambi, and now I can go to the friends view, which hasn't even been rendered yet, and you'll see that immediately I have Bruce and Bambi available here because, again, these two views, the friends view and the add view, are communicating via a shared conduit, in this case the runtime abstraction. So I think there are a host of benefits to creating directly accessible modals via the route, not least of which is that it forces developers to create more decoupled, more independent, more flexible views, which will provide for a better both support team experience as well as, I think, the long-term maintainability of your Angular application. And though the runtime abstraction isn't required, I'll just share mine in this case. It's very simple. You can see internally it just uses a simple store, which is basically a glorified behavior subject. It has a friends collection. When I choose to add a friend with a given name, you can see that I get the state snapshot. I create the new friend object, and then I create a new friends collection by concatenating the old friends with the new friends, and I'm sorting. And then I'm setting the state. So the pattern behind the runtime is the same way you'd see in many of the state systems. You get some sort of snapshot of the state, you create a new snapshot, and then you save that into the state, that mutation into the state. In this case, I'm using immutable data patterns. Remove friend is similar. I get the state snapshot for friends. I filter out the friend with the given ID, getting the new friends collection, which I then store back into the state. And then friends here is, of course, just an RxJS stream off of that underlying store. And that's really all there is to it. There's more code in this demo, but probably not worth showing in this video. You can certainly view it on the GitHub repo. The point here is just that by creating a directly routable modal window, you can get to them directly by route. Here you can see I'm refreshing and I'm still in the route. I can get out of the route by using my back button. I can get back into it using my forward button, and it allows us to create views that are much more independent and have to communicate through more of a shared conduit. And of course, this doesn't apply to all modal windows. Like if I'm prompting a user for something, then probably you shouldn't have that particular prompt be routable because it simply wouldn't make sense. What would it mean to route to a prompt outside of its calling context? So again, this doesn't apply to every single modal window, but I would posit that it actually applies to the vast majority of modal windows in a single page application. And by creating this decoupled, independently accessible architecture, you're going to create a more maintainable application in the long run.